The rain had been coming down for hours, the kind that blurred the streetlights and turned the city into a watercolor of muted golds and grays. Inside the modest, dimly lit lobby of the Harborview Hotel, Elena Ward sat behind the reception desk, the muted hum of the wall heater and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the windows her only companions. She was used to nights like this, long, quiet stretches where time seemed to hold its breath. She had her hair pulled into a loose knot, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and a half-finished law textbook lying open beside the reservation ledger. The faint circles beneath her eyes spoke of too many nights like this, but her posture remained straight, her expression alert. Elena prided herself on that. No matter how tired she was, she would never let the world think she was worn down. The front door hissed open on a gust of cold, damp air, pulling her gaze up. He stepped in like he owned the ground his shoes touched. Adrian Cole. She didn't know him yet, not by name, but his presence made the air feel heavier, more deliberate. A man in a tailored charcoal coat, his black hair just damp enough to glint under the lobby lights. Everything about him seemed expensive. The cut of his clothes, the way he didn't glance around but went straight to the desk as if expecting the world to rearrange itself to suit him. "Good evening," Elena said, her voice steady, professional, though she felt an odd current beneath her ribs. "My flight was grounded," he said, his tone clipped, efficient. "I need a suite, tonight." She typed quickly, fingers moving over the worn keyboard, grateful for the distraction of procedure. "We have one available. Will you need a late checkout?" He met her eyes then, not with the appraisal she often saw from late-night guests, but with something sharper. Calculation, perhaps, or curiosity restrained. It was unsaid, tittling in a way she couldn't define. While the printer churned out his paperwork, she excused herself to the small office behind the desk to take a call that had been vibrating in her pocket for the past minute. She shut the door halfway, voice low but urgent. "I told you I'd have the payment by the end of the week. Yes, I understand the hospital policy, but my sister's treatment can't wait. Please, just give me until Friday." A pause, then a faint, "Thank you," before she ended the call and exhaled slowly. She pressed her palm to her forehead, gathering herself. What she didn't know was that through the slight gap in the door, Adrian had heard enough. Not the whole story, but enough to recognize the tone of someone negotiating from desperation. When she stepped back into the lobby, her face was composed again, every trace of strain tucked neatly away. She handed him the keycard with a small, practiced smile. "Your suite is on the top floor. The elevator is to your right." He took it without looking down, his eyes fixed on her for a beat longer than politeness required. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps muffled by the thick lobby carpet. Elena returned to her desk, her gaze following him until the elevator doors closed. She told herself it was nothing, just another guest. But something in the way he had looked at her stayed behind, like the echo of a note that refuses to fade. And in the back of her mind, she knew that men like that, men who carried storms in their wake, never crossed her path without changing something, even if she didn't yet know what. The next night the rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of wet pavement and something unsettled. Elena, long before she saw him again, the hotel lobby was busier than usual, a tour group checking in and the phone ringing off the hook. She kept her head down, focused on the reservate, iron book telling herself that the stranger from last night was already far away on some private jet bound for another world. Near midnight, the noise faded and the lobby grew quiet again. She was reaching for her law textbook when the glass doors slid open and Adrian Cole stepped inside, this time without the coat. His shirt sleeves rolled back, revealing strong forearms. His eyes found her instantly, as though he had expected her to still be here. His stride was unhurried, deliberate, as if each step had a purpose. "I do not believe we were introduced last night," he said, his voice lower than before, smooth but with an edge. "I am Adrian Cole." She gave the smallest nod, the professional mask slipping into place again. "Mr. Cole, welcome back. Are you checking in?" He ignored the question and instead glanced at the empty lobby. "I thought perhaps you could join me for dinner." The request caught her off guard. She shook her head with polite finality. "I am on shift and I do not socialize with guests." His mouth curved in the faintest hint of a smile, but there was something unreadable in his eyes, something that said he was not used to hearing no from anyone. "Very well," he said, but did not leave. Instead, he placed a crisp envelope on the counter. The weight of it told her without opening it that there was money inside. He looked at her as if testing her reaction. "A private evening," he said, his voice even. "You set the time and place. I will make it worth your while." Her breath caught, not from temptation, but from shock. She pushed the envelope back across the counter. "I am not for sale." His gaze did not waver. Perhaps not, but everyone has a price. A phone call from the back office saved her from answering. The hospital again. She stepped away, answering quickly. "Yes, this is Elena Ward. No, I cannot cover that amount tonight. I will bring what I can tomorrow. I just need more time." She turned her face toward the wall so he could not see the crack in her voice. When she returned to the desk, he was still there, hands in his pockets, as if nothing had passed between them earlier. He studied her with the calm of a man who already knew she would eventually come to him. Then he simply said, "My offer expires in 48 hours," and walked out into the night. Elena stood frozen by the desk, the sound of the sliding doors closing echoing louder than the rain from the night before. She told herself she would never take the offer, that she could handle her sister's bills on her own, but somewhere beneath her resolve, a different truth was taking root. The clock had already started counting down. Elena hardly slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the white envelope on the desk and his calm, unshakable expression. The city outside her small apartment was still dripping from yesterday's rain, and inside the air felt heavy with questions she did not want to answer by morning. She had convinced herself she would forget his words, but by the end of her shift the next day, the hospital called again. This time the voice on the other end was urgent, telling her that her sister's treatment could not wait any longer. She left work early, walking the long way home, to think her shoes tapping over the slick sidewalk, every step pulling her closer to a choice she did not want to make. The streets glowed with wet reflections, neon signs and taillights painting her face in fleeting colors. When she reached her building, she paused in the doorway, heart pounding, her phone in her hand. She stared at the business card she had shoved deep in her bag. The number stared back at her like a dare. With a slow breath, she pressed call. The ring was short, almost too short, before his voice answered low, steady, as if he had been expecting her. "Yes, Miss Ward." The words caught in her throat. "I want to meet you tonight." His reply was immediate. "My driver will pick you up in 1 hour." The hour passed like a blur. She stood by her apartment window, watching the city move below her, clutching her coat tighter than necessary. When the black sedan pulled up, the driver stepped out, holding the door without a word. Inside, the car smelled faintly of leather and something darker, a fragrance she could not place. The ride was smooth and silent, the city lights sliding past like scenes from another life. The car finally stopped in front of a glass tower that seemed to touch the clouds. The doorman opened the door without question, and soon she was stepping into an elevator lined with mirrors, her reflection looking back at her with a mix of resolve and fear. She told herself this was for her sister, nothing else. When the elevator doors opened, the top floor stretched before her, all glass and shadow. The city sprawled beneath like a map lit in gold. Adrian was standing by the window, a drink in his hand, the skyline behind him making him look even taller. Stronger, he turned when she stepped in, his eyes taking in every detail of her without a word. "You came." His voice held no surprise, only a quiet satisfaction. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I said I would." His steps toward her were unhurried, but there was a pull in them, a gravity she could feel in her bones. The glass walls reflected them from every angle, two figures moving closer in a space too quiet for comfort. Outside, the city roared with life, but inside, the air was thick with silence and the unspoken truth that nothing after tonight would ever be the same. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a realm. He ruled. Every surface gleamed with cold perfection, from the polished marble floors to the dark glass walls that swallowed the city lights. Whole, Elena stood near the entrance, her coat still on her fingers, tight around the strap of her bag. Adrian moved with the ease of someone who owned every inch of space, pouring himself a drink. Before looking at her again, his gaze steady, unblinking. "Take off your coat," he said, not as a request, but as if removing it was inevitable. She hesitated, then slowly slipped it from her shoulders. Laying it over the back of a chair, she kept her posture straight, unwilling to let him see the unease running through her. His eyes traveled over her in a way that felt less like desire and more like study, as though he was trying to understand what kind of woman had walked into his domain under these terms. "Come sit." He gestured toward the low couch overlooking the skyline. She walked past him, each step measured and deliberate. The leather was cool beneath her as she sat, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Adrian took the seat across from her, close enough for his presence to press against her, but far enough to keep the moment suspended between them. He spoke of nothing personal, asking about her drink preference, talking about the storm that had grounded his jet. His voice, even his hands, relaxed on the glass he held, but his eyes told another story. There was calculation there and something else she could not name. When he finally set the drink aside, the air shifted. The distance between them seemed to collapse in a single heartbeat. His hand brushed against hers on the couch, slow enough for her to pull away, but she didn't. She told herself it was because she had chosen to be here, but deep down she knew it was also because some part of her wanted to know what would happen if she didn't move. The first touch was not hurried, it was deliberate. His fingers curling under her chin to tilt her face toward his. The kiss that followed was slow, almost careful, but there was a weight behind it, a promise that this was only the beginning. Elena's heartbeat thundered in her ears, the room fading until there was only him, the taste of his breath, the warmth of his hand at the small of her back. Time blurred. She let herself be guided, yet at every moment she could feel the pull of something unspoken, as if each movement was a test. He wanted to see how far she would go, and whether she would stop herself before he did. Later, as the city's glow dimmed into the deep hours of night, he paused, looking at her in a way that made her chest tighten. His breathing had changed slower, deeper, his eyes searching hers as though he was looking for an answer to a question he had not dared to speak. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that silent space between one breath and the next, something irreversible had already begun. The room was still except for the faint hum of the city below. Elena lay there staring at the shifting lights on the ceiling, her heartbeat slowly calming. She had thought this night would leave her feeling empty. But instead, there was a strange weight in her chest, one she could not name. Adrian sat at the edge of the bed, his back to her, pulling on his shirt in the reflection of the glass wall. She saw him pause, his gaze fixed on the sheets. The smallest flicker crossed his face, shock quickly hidden beneath his usual mask. She sat up, clutching the blanket around her, unsure of what had caught his attention. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before. "You were untouched." It was not a question, more like an accusation whispered to himself. Elena's stomach knotted. She turned away, unwilling to let him see her expression. "Yes, and now it is done," she said flatly. He said nothing for a long moment, his hands motionless as if he was caught between words he could not say. When she rose to dress, he stepped toward her, but stopped short. She moved past him, her head high, refusing to take the envelope he had set on the table. "I do not want your money, Adrian." His jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Instead, he followed her to the elevator door, watching her press the button, his eyes darker than before. The ride down felt endless. She kept her gaze on the glowing numbers above the door, not trusting herself to look at him. When the doors opened, she stepped out without a word. The night air was cold, sharp against her skin. She walked until the tower was just another shape in the skyline. Adrian remained standing in the penthouse, staring at the empty space where she had been his drink, untouched. The sheets still rumpled the city, sprawling beneath him like a chessboard. Yet for the first time he could not see the next move. He told himself she would call, that she would want something, but a part of him already knew she would vanish. By morning, Elena was back at the hotel, her shift beginning before sunrise, her eyes heavy, but her voice calm as she greeted guests. She buried herself in routine as if nothing had changed, but deep inside she knew everything had. When the door chimed near midnight, she half expected to see him again, yet it was only a couple checking in. She exhaled, relief and disappointment tangled together. Adrian sat in his office across town, the city lights behind him, his phone on the desk, untouched, her number written on the card beside it. He stared at it longer than he should have, each hour passing, making him more certain that what had happened was not something he could buy back or forget, and for a man who had always been in control, the thought unsettled him more than he cared to admit. At his window with coffee growing cold in his hand, he told himself it was curiosity that made him want to see her again. But the truth ran deeper. It was the way she had looked at him without fear, without greed, and the fact that she had left without taking anything. He began making quiet inquiries, not the obvious kind that would make her feel hunted. He learned she had taken extra shifts, not at the hotel, but at a small bookstore across town, a place far removed from his world. That evening, instead of sending someone, he went himself. The shop was nearly empty, the soft light making her hair shine in warm tones. She was arranging books on a high shelf when she noticed him. Her body went still for a moment before she returned to her task as if he were just another customer. "You should not be here," she said, without turning around. "I came to return something." His voice was calm, but there was a strain beneath it. She faced him, then her eyes cool and guarded. "You cannot return what you took." Adrian stepped closer, holding her gaze. "I did not mean to take it." She folded her arms tight around herself. "That is exactly what makes it worse." The silence between them stretched until a customer entered. Breaking the tension, Adrian left without pressing her further. But outside, he stood in the shadow of the awning, watching her through the window. She moved with a quiet grace, her focus on the small tasks of her world. It was a world he could not enter without shattering something. The next day, Elena found her rent reduced by an amount that covered what she was. Behind, there was no note, but she knew it was him. She felt anger at his interference, yet a small part of her was shaken by the fact that he had done it without asking for anything in return at the hospital. Her sister's treatment resumed, suddenly fully covered. The nurse said it was an anonymous benefactor. Elena's throat tightened. She did not need a name to know who it was. That night, she stood at her apartment window looking out over the city lights, wondering if he was somewhere looking back. She hated the thought of owing him anything. Yet the truth was sinking in. Adrian Cole was not walking away, and for reasons she could not understand, she was no longer certain she wanted him to. Elena could no longer ignore the pattern every time life pressed too hard. There was some invisible hand lifting the weight, and every time she traced the help back, it led to Adrian. She wanted to be furious, but fury did not explain the way her heart raced when she saw him waiting across the street from the bookstore one evening, his coat collar turned up against the wind, his presence too solid to be coincidence. She crossed the road with slow, deliberate steps, the city lights catching in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low enough to hide the tremor in it. "Watching over you," he said simply, as if the words required no explanation. "I do not need a guardian," she replied sharply. "Then tell me why you look at the ground every time someone mentions your sister's treatment." Her breath caught. The truth was too close to the surface. He stepped closer, his voice quieter. "This is not charity. It is repayment for something I cannot return." She met his gaze hard. "You think money evens what happened between us? You think it cancels it out?" Rain began to fall soft at first, then heavier. He made no move to shield himself, his eyes never leaving hers. "You gave me something that night, something you did not give to anyone else, and I treated it like a transaction that was my mistake, one I will not make again." The storm around them thickened, cars hissed by their clothes, dampening in the downpour, yet neither moved. Finally, she turned, walking away without answering, but each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted letting her go. Adrian watched her vanish into the blur of rain. He had built empires by predicting moves, by controlling outcomes, but with Elena, every action was a risk, every choice a surrender. Later that night, he sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the city spread below, the rain streaking down the glass. He realized he no longer cared about winning her over like a deal. He simply wanted to be near her, even if it meant standing in the rain unseen. Across the city, Elena sat by her sister's bedside, listening to the steady rhythm of the monitors outside the window. The rain still fell, and in the reflection she thought she saw him for a moment watching from the street. But when she looked again, the space was empty, and she could not tell if the image had been real or something she secretly wished to see. The hospital corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic, and rain carried in from the umbrellas left dripping by the entrance. Elena sat on a plastic chair, her sister finally asleep in the room behind her. She rubbed her temples, staring at the floor, when a shadow stretched across her knees. She looked up and found Adrian standing there, no suit tonight, just a dark sweater and jeans that made him look less like a billionaire and more like a man who had been pacing for hours. "You should be home resting," he said, his tone softer than she had ever heard. "I am exactly where I need to be," she replied. He glanced toward the room, then back at her. May I? He gestured toward the empty chair beside her. She hesitated, then nodded. He sat the space between them, small enough for their shoulders to almost touch. For a while they said nothing, the quiet broken only by the muffled beeps of machines for nearby rooms. Finally, Adrian spoke, his gaze fixed ahead. I grew up in a house where needing someone was treated like a weakness. If you showed it, you lost something valuable. I learned to control everything, my work, my time, my relationships, especially my relationships. Elena listened without looking at him, unsure if this was an explanation or a warning. The night with you was not what I expected, he continued, and when I realized what it meant, I did what I always do. I put walls up, I ran from it, but I have not been able to stop thinking about it. She swallowed her reply, keeping her eyes on the floor. He turned slightly, studying her profile. I know I cannot undo what I did, but I want to understand why you came that night. She met his eyes, then steady and unflinching, because I had no other choice, and because I thought I could keep myself from feeling anything. I was wrong. He absorbed her words in silence, his expression unreadable, but his eyes carried something raw. A nurse passed by, breaking their gaze. Elena stood to return to her sister's room. Adrian rose too, lingering in the hallway, his voice low. You may never trust me again, and I cannot blame you, but I will be here whether you want me to be or not. Later that night, when she left the hospital, the rain had stopped, yet the pavement still shimmered under the streetlights. Adrian's car was parked at the curb, but he did not call her over. He simply stood beside it, watching her go as if waiting for a signal that never came. She walked on her pulse, loud in her ears, not knowing whether his presence behind her was a burden or a comfort, and not ready to admit it might be both. The call came just after midnight, Elena's phone vibrating against the nightstand, the voice on the other end urgent, telling her that her sister's condition had worsened. She threw on the first coat she found and ran into the cold street, hailing a cab. The city lights smeared into streaks as they rushed through intersections, every red light feeling like an eternity. When she reached the hospital, the corridors were alive with hurried footsteps and clipped instructions. Her sister was already in intensive care. Elena gripped the edge of the counter as the nurse explained the situation, words blurring together in a haze of fear. Then she heard another voice behind her, calm, steady, cutting through the noise. Adrian was there, speaking to the doctors with an authority that made them listen. She had not called him yet. Somehow he had arrived before she could even think to ask for help. She watched him sign papers, make decisions, handle everything as if the crisis was his own, his focus never wavering. When he finally came to her, his eyes softened. You should sit down. You are shaking. She wanted to argue, but her legs betrayed her, and she let him guide her to a chair. He crouched in front of her, his hands firm on her knees. Your sister will get what she needs tonight, whatever it takes. Hours passed in fragments of coffee cups, untouched, and whispered updates every time she looked up. He was there, leaning against the wall or standing at the doorway like a sentinel, when the doctor emerged at last and said her sister was stable. Elena felt her chest loosen for the first time in hours. She turned to thank Adrian, but the words caught when she saw the exhaustion etched into his face. It was not the weariness of money spent or time given. It was something deeper, the toll of caring. They walked out together into the quiet street, the first light of dawn brushing the sky. She stopped on the steps, searching his thigh. Ace, why are you doing this? Adrian met her gaze without flinching, because when you walked away that night I realized I did not want to live in a world where you were gone. The city was still half asleep, the air cool and damp around them. She looked at him for a long moment, seeing past the polished surface into the man beneath, and it unsettled her more than anything he had done for her when they parted. She did not say thank you, she did not say stay. She simply let him watch her go, knowing that something between them had shifted in a way that could not be undone. The morning after the crisis, the air in Elena's apartment felt different. Sunlight spilled across the small kitchen table where her sister sat, pale but smiling weakly. Adrian had left before dawn, without a word. Yet his presence lingered in the quiet, as if the walls themselves had absorbed it. Elena brewed tea, her hands steady for the first time in days, but her mind restless. She kept replaying the moment outside the hospital when he had said he could not imagine a world without her in it. By late afternoon, a knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find him standing there, not in a suit, not with the usual guarded posture, but in a simple dark shirt, the wind ruffling his hair. He held no flowers, no gifts, just a small envelope, and the faintest hesitation in his eyes. "May I come in?" She stepped aside without speaking. He walked to the kitchen, glancing toward her sister who had dozed off on the couch. "I have spent my life buying solutions," Adrian said quietly, leaning against the counter. "But you are not a problem to be solved. You are a choice, and I want to choose you every day." Elena stayed still, her heart pounding. She had heard beautiful words before from other men, but never with this kind of weight behind them. He set the envelope on the table. Inside was no money, no contract, just a worn photograph of a small coastal house. He explained it was the only place from his childhood where he had ever felt safe, a place he had never shown anyone. "I want you to see it because I want you to see me." Her throat tightened. She searched his face for any trace of the man who had treated her like a transaction that first night, and found instead someone stripped of armor, someone willing to be known. He stepped closer, his voice lower. "I will not ask for your forgiveness today, but I will spend as long as it takes proving I deserve it." She did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers light but sure, his other hand rose almost instinctively to cover hers. And in that simple touch, the space between them shifted, no longer a battlefield but a bridge outside. The evening was settling over the city, the first streetlights flickering on inside the apartment. Her sister stirred and smiled faintly at the sight of them standing together. Elena knew the road ahead would not be smooth. Trust was not built in a night. But as she looked at Adrian, she saw not the man who had used her, but the one who had stood in hospital corridors at 3 a.m, who had weathered the storm outside her bookstore, who had knelt in his own way without needing to be asked. She squeezed his hand once, then let it go, turning to pour tea for both of them without another word, and that was enough for now.